Whoa, that feels like asking a lot, Kim. Especially in this day and age, that feels like asking a lot.
Hey.
Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross, and I'm very excited today because I have Kim Wehle with me, and she is the author of a book called Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. She also has an incredible Substack detailing everything you need to know about the Supreme Court and all her decisions, and I'm a huge fan, and I'm very excited to have her. Kim, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Emily. Thank you for having me.
What are you drinking today?
I just have an iced tea. It's
see,
afternoon on the East Coast, but it's delicious and refreshing. It's hot outside.
Yeah, that is really responsible. I'm also on the East Coast, but I am having a beer. So I like to pick a beer that I feel like aligns with the topic. And so this one's called the Ruckus. And I was like, that feels on brand. And so it's Aurora Brewing Co.
Right? Buckle up for the next few months.
Yep. I was like, nothing like the Supreme Court just causing a ruckus. Anyways, cheers. Very excited.
Cheers.
So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? And then the question I always like to ask is, why should my listeners trust what you have to say?
Well, I've been practicing law for a long time. I was in the United States government as an assistant U.S. attorney. As a young lawyer, I worked on the Whitewater investigation for Ken Starr, which involved investigating a Democratic president, Bill Clinton. And I've been teaching law now for over 15 years. I'm tenured at the University of Baltimore and written all about the separation of powers. But I really appreciate that question, Emily, because this is the fourth in a series of books. And each title, it ends with the words "and why." How to read the Constitution and why. What you need to know about voting and why. How to think like a lawyer and why. And the latest, Pardon Power, how the pardon system works and why. And that's because my aim is to teach or help people understand how they can have the tools to make their own assessments. Don't listen to me. But I do think if you listen and read some of my work, you can start noodling through these problems for yourself, because they're actually dealing with constitutional questions and legal questions boils down to a lot of common sense if it's explained properly. So, I have people that appreciate and don't appreciate me across the aisle. So I think maybe I'm doing something right.
It's perfect. As long as you're hated on both sides, I feel like that's great.
Yeah.
Means you're successful. Exactly. Totally. No, I appreciate that. And my whole point is, it's like, listen, I'm not an unbiased person, but it's important to let people know where your biases lie, what your history is, and then they can take what you have to say and they can put it in that context. And then it makes learning and trusting and believing what the media has to say so much easier.
Yeah. And I also encourage people to read original sources. 30 years ago, it was really hard to find information. 40 years ago, you had to go to the card catalog and microfiche, and digging up facts was difficult. And now it's sorting. It's very, you've got to be really careful, but all of it, the good news is it's all online. So click on the original link. I link to everything in my op-eds and stuff, and read this stuff for yourself. That's one of the good things about our internet digital age.
You can find everything on the internet, folks, in case you did not know. Everything.
Okay. But you got to look.
You have to.
Healthy skepticism.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear more about your book. It sounds fascinating. The Pardon Power is something that I think people know. It kind of feels like, from an outsider, the most dictatorial power within the Constitution.
I think that's probably right.
Yeah. So would love to know more about the book, what you dive into, and the history of it all.
Well, I dive into everything from the idea back in the Bible. When Jesus Christ was crucified, he was crucified on a holy day when Pontius Pilate was offered a pardon of one of two criminals, quote, criminal, unquote. One was Barabbas, a murderer, and one was Jesus. And the crowd got to pick, and they said, crucify him. And so Barabbas was pardoned. Pardons go back to the Code of Hammurabi, ancient Babylonian text. Of course, to your point, goes back to common law England, to the king. And it arose in the 7th century in England when there was no criminal justice system. And if you committed a crime, you actually committed it against the family of the victim. And then so it was very much a dog-eat-dog, self-help type judicial system or criminal justice system where people would have revenge killings. And the king kind of stepped in and said, no, wait, if you commit a crime, it's actually against me, the crown, because the crown is divine. My power comes from God. And the idea was the king could give pardons for mercy in a system where there really weren't the checks and balances there are now. So mercy is the number one rationale. Number two is what we call amnesty. That's the first American pardon was George Washington for the Whiskey Rebellion, where distillers were angry about taxes that were imposed on them to pay for the Revolutionary War. And he pardoned them after a rebellion to sort of just chill the country out. And then there's a third category of pardons that we're seeing more and more of, and those are corrupt pardons for self-gain, for self-interest. Those are the bad ones, and they do go all the way back to England. But I argue in the book there's no place for them. And under Donald Trump, they kind of hit a high watermark. And I think if he gets reelected, we'll see many more of them, in addition to him promising to pardon the insurrectionists and thereby getting his own private militia. So the pardon power is important now, Emily, because it's sort of one of the many issues that's on the ballot in a couple of months is, do we want this dictatorial power to be exercised in the ways, on steroids that we've already seen in disturbing manner?
Totally. It is I think one of the most relevant topics as we go into this election. What does the Constitution say about pardon power?
The Constitution in Article 2 gives the job description for presidents, right? And it says that they shall have the power to grant pardons and reprieves except for impeachments. So it doesn't define pardon. It doesn't put any limits or ban any limits except for impeachments. If someone's impeached, they cannot be pardoned for that impeachment. The impeachment still stands.
Why did the framers of the Constitution put that within the document? What happened with England?
There wasn't a lot of discussion around it, but they did think it was a good idea to let the chief executive to exercise mercy, and that there needed to be flexibility. Now, there were others at the Constitutional Convention that wanted the Senate to be able to second guess pardons, or who wanted to ban pardons for treasons. But I think James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, their view prevailed that the chief executive, the president, I think the belief was that they would act with integrity and they would act thoughtfully, and that kind of flexibility was necessary. But relatively speaking, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion. And it is expanded under American law beyond even what it is in England, even at the time. Parliament shared the pardon power with the king at the time. So did the church. So the pardon power under U.S. law has now become this mythological monarch-like power that isn't even matched in England itself. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to not balance that power against other parts of the Constitution like we do with everything else in the Constitution. I don't know why it gets this extra special sauce treatment.
Yeah, no, something tells me the founding fathers would be shell-shocked to how some of the things have been interpreted from the Constitution in the current.
Yeah, James Madison, he said a couple things. Ambition needs to be made to counteract ambition. And if men were angels, why would we need government? What does that say to me? It says that they knew that you give people too much power, they'll abuse it. That was what they understood. There needs to be checks and balances. There should be checks and balances on the pardon power, and there should be checks and balances on the use of official power. And I know we'll get into this, to commit crimes. And both of those things are completely out of whack with the foundational concept of government by the people versus government by a monarch who has divine power.
The Supreme Court ruled on whether or not former President Trump has immunity, whether or not he can be charged for the actions he took while president, and whether or not he has immunity in those actions. So would love for you to kind of dive into this ruling and what it's stated and why it's such a jaw-dropping decision to come out of the Supreme Court.
Well, first of all, it's jaw-dropping because the court manufactured a new part of the Constitution. There's nothing in Article 2 giving presidents immunity. There is in the speech and debate clause for members of Congress. They have immunity for actions taken in connection with their legislative duties. They cannot be sued for that. And that alone is stunning. The other stunning piece is the court created this to this bifurcation. And they basically said, if a president uses their official powers to commit crimes, then that's immune, meaning you can't touch it. A prosecutor can't look at it, can't look into motive, cannot prosecute it. But if they use their unofficial powers, you can. And I think a lot of people in the media, I'm also a legal analyst for ABC News. I mean, I do a lot of media and I have a lot of respect for the media, but I think that distinction sort of duped people into thinking there actually was some scope of actual liability that's meaningful for presidents. But think about it, Emily. It's the official stuff that we need to worry about as a matter of the separation of powers. I mean, if a president lies in a deposition in a divorce proceeding, that's kind of gross, but I don't care. But it doesn't affect my life. But if a president directs the IRS to start looking into the tax liability of all of my friends and family in order to bully me to speak a certain way, and they'll always find some arguable inconsistency, that's a problem for me. That's an abuse of power. And that's the part the court has now basically green-lighted presidents to do whatever they want. And now people will say, well, that won't ever happen. But it's all about incentives, Emily. It's not about history. You take the tickets away for speeding, people will speed. The minute you put the speed camera that's hiding and you get the ticket in the mail, you'll slow down when you go there again. There are no tickets for speeding and committing crimes in the White House. And the Supreme Court acknowledged what they're talking about is crimes in the White House, that there would be no need to create immunity if the predicate for that is crimes, violations of the United States Federal Code in the White House they didn't anticipate that happening.
Which is crazy.
It is crazy. Thank you.
It's crazy.
That's a technical legal term. I agree with it.
Thank you. Yeah, in legalese, that's crazy. Right. So we're going to dive into it more. But so obviously this was along the ideological variations from conservative and liberal within the Supreme Court. So 6 ruled in favor, though Amy Coney Barrett did not sign on to one part of it, which I found very interesting.
So the court went further than just creating immunity, and they said you can't even use evidence of the official act.
Yeah.
So, and she had a problem with that. So think about, a crime is like recipe in a cookbook. Mm-hmm. So if I made banana bread today, you need the bananas, you need the sugar, you need the flour, you need the baking soda, you need the salt. Like if you don't put the baking soda in there or the bananas in there, it won't work. Right. So take bribery, for example, which I think most people will say presidents shouldn't be taking bribes. And that's actually expressly impeachable in the Constitution. Bribery is a high crime and misdemeanors. It's spelled out. But they're basically saying, okay, so if it's bribery, you've got to show a quid pro quo. I'll give you a pardon, back to my book, if you give me $10 million. Now, in order to prove the pardon, prove bribery, you've got to show that there was the pardon in exchange for the $10 million. They've taken the pardon part off the table.
Right.
So all you can show is the $10 million, and that's not illegal to let someone give you $10 million. So she's saying they've basically deactivated any reasonable prosecution because you can't have that part of the recipe in the indictment. And without that, the entire thing fails because you've got to prove each ingredient of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes. And I think that was part of the decision the entire decision completely changed the powers of the presidency completely. Right. And there was 3 different actions that were taken. I have here, no immunity for unofficial acts, that there's at least some presumptive immunity for official acts. And there's absolute immunity for exercising the president's core constitutional powers, right? Core constitutional powers, by the way, is like, you can send the militia after a single person. Like they can do whatever they want. Like it's kind of crazy.
Well, I mean, they could have constrained that to what's in the Constitution, like pardons in there, but they didn't even do that.
No, they didn't.
They said that core powers can be things that aren't even in the Constitution. And remember, Emily, these are the textualists. These are the ones that are running around saying, oh, abortion isn't in the Constitution, so you don't have that right. So to your original question, why should people trust me? I mean, I'm looking for an intellectual honesty and coherence. If you're a textualist, you're a textualist. You shouldn't be making up immunity.
Whoa, that feels like asking a lot, Kim. Especially in this day and age. That feels like asking a lot.
Hey, You hope judges can do it, but unfortunately, no, not on this court. It's really sad. And I would say, hurrah for Amy Coney Barrett, but why'd she join the majority?
Right.
She could have filed a separate dissent. And so
No,
I think that's a little bit
she knew it was
disgusting.
wrong and the gravity of that decision, because that just basically the court's not supposed to have political opinions, right? In saying that basically Trump's powers, official acts while he was president, cannot be used as evidence within charging him for unofficial crimes without naming or listing any of these unofficial actions or any of these official actions, right? Forcing the lower courts to describe and define that, which is going to just continue this case for as long as it can go.
It could be years.
Truly years, right? I mean, they directly impacted Trump's, whether or not Trump is basically held liable for this or not.
Absolutely. I mean, they would, I think the response to that would say, oh, no, it's not political because this holds for Democratic presidents too. The problem is, as you indicate, they've now made themselves the super kings of criminal immunity. They've basically stepped into the shoes of prosecutors. And as Justice Sotomayor said in her dissent, they've made themselves the pre-clearance panel for any indictment against a president. And they've left themselves enough wiggle room that if they see an indictment they like against maybe a Democratic president, because they haven't defined unofficial acts, maybe that one will go forward. I mean, they've not only amended the Constitution, right? Because the Constitution makes clear if you're impeached for conduct, and he was impeached for January 6th, he wasn't convicted, you can still be prosecuted. That is expressed in the Constitution. It says that. Right. So they not only amended that part of the Constitution, they then injected immunity into the Constitution. And then they basically gave themselves prosecutorial power to greenlight indictments and evidence when they see it. So it's a massive power grab on their part. And, I think it calls for a constitutional amendment. I mean, we've done it 27 times out of 11,000 attempts, and it's in the history of the 235-year history of the country. But to your point, Emily, I think this is that dramatic and that egregious, it requires it. And unfortunately, it's been kind of lost in the shuffle of other news, and people don't really see how serious it is.
Yeah. And for my past job, I created like a video explaining about this decision because of the appeals and because these cases are now required to look at this decision in which ways of the cases, right? So you've already seen that happen with Judge Merchan and having to deal with Trump's hush money, of which he was found guilty and convicted, right? But now they have to reestablish whether or not the evidence and the conviction is on par with the new constitutional ruling before potentially being sentenced, right? And so even if that is found, I believe that's happening sometime mid-September, found that the conviction is still follows the constitutional law of this immunity, then that's going to be appealed and that's going to keep going. And what happens is that then this allows Trump to potentially be reelected to get into office. And then he has the power over the DOJ. And he has the power then to also potentially pardon himself. And that's why this is such an incredibly influential decision that I think kind of just was addressed vaguely, right? But I don't think people really realized how much this kind of like co-conspiracy in a way really allowed Trump to potentially get off the hook if he were to win.
Yeah. And I'll tell you one other thing, the reason that the pardon, it's not only he could self-pardon, and I think it's even possible he did self-pardon the last time when he was still in office, and he just hasn't had a need to pull it out yet, but it's in a drawer someplace in Mar-a-Lago along with classified information that's still missing. And of course, I'm joking there, sadly. But think about the use of official power too. Right. So the court says you can use official power to commit crimes, but not unofficial power. So president wants to kill a political rival, pulls out the private pistol, kills a political rival. Maybe that's unofficial. I don't know. It's a political rival. So he'd make the argument it's official, but it's his own handgun that he keeps in the bathroom in his summer house. OK, he's not going to be dumb enough to do that. He's instead going to direct the military or, some sniper within the FBI or there are all kinds of law enforcement that he's going to get one of them to kill the political rival. That's the use of official power. But that guy's going to say, wait a minute, I don't have immunity. I'm not president. I don't want to do that for you. And he'll say, I'll pardon you. So you take the immunity decision, you add pardons, and now all of a sudden you have a legal criminal enterprise in the Oval Office and within the military, within the FBI, within DOJ, within CIA. Anyone that's willing to go along with him for a pardon or some other goodies, or say no and face the consequences of ticking off a man like Donald Trump.
It's so scary. It is. It's beyond scary.
Yeah, so the pardon power is important. And then the last piece, as we talked about, he's also agreed to pardon the militias, or the 1,200 people, which I said would create a mini militia. But polls show, poll just done last month of pardons. Majorities of Americans, including Republicans, don't want to see that, because that means, well, I'll reward you for using political violence around elections.
It's a cycle of violence. If you were to pardon these people, then it allows these people to believe that, oh, then I can do anything, right? Without any type of repercussion. My question for you, though, is that because this is, from what I understand, pardon power can only relate to federal crimes.
The president's pardon power. Yeah. Every state has its own pardon system, but not that many governors have the kind of unlimited pardon power that presidents are perceived to have.
So does this immunity ruling from the Supreme Court affect the 2 state cases against Trump? And could he pardon himself if he were to be convicted within the state?
No. So the answer to number 1 is yes. The answer to number 2 is no. The answer to number 1 is yes, because any actions that he took while president are going to have an impact. Now, are going to be impacted by the immunity decision. Now, in the New York Manhattan trial, right, the hush money trial, he wrote the checks to some of the checks to pay back Michael Cohen for paying off Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet from the Oval Office. He wrote the checks from the Oval Office. So, I mean, he took some action. And likewise in the Mar-a-Lago case, which, as you know, is been completely dismissed. So that's dead in the water on other grounds. But assuming that gets reactivated, he had the boxes packed up when he was still president. So the court, this is when you say it's going to take a long time. Every piece of evidence now has to go through this multi-factored immunity filter. It's not categories. It's every piece of evidence if it's not in the core power, you have to say, okay, is it within the outer boundaries of official power? If it is within the outer boundaries of official power, basically, to use Sotomayor's words, would it make the president anxious if he used that power and could be indicted? Would the threat of an indictment make him anxious, essentially, is the bottom line. And listen, I mean, I think anybody would be anxious with the threat of an indictment for anything. So that's not a test.
No. I'm anxious walking down the street. Like, what do you?
That's not a test. I mean, they used other flowery language, and essentially, so if it falls in that, then the prosecution has to overcome this super burden and show that it wouldn't affect a president's ability to, or just chill his ability to make decisions. But that's what we want. We want presidents to pause before they commit crimes. We want them to do that. And so they've now made that the test, that if they pause, they get immunity. It's like, no, we want them to pause. We don't want them to order SEAL Team 6 to murder, the candidate for office on the other side of the aisle in the United States.
Yes, no, generally, I believe most people can agree that taking a pause and thinking through actions is generally good, especially when it's the president of the United States.
Right. No, it's a catastrophic, abysmally reasoned, just shameful excuse for a decision. I mean, the more I think about it and the more I read it and reread it, now I should say, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Why did they do it? They did it for 2 reasons. I think one, they really don't like that Smith went after Donald Trump around January 6th. They really don't. And they see that as a bellwether moment in American history. They think that changed everything. And that if they don't step in to protect presidents, we're going to see prosecutors ping pong back and forth prosecuting former presidents, and the whole system will come down. I think they're smart enough to know the likelihood of that happening is lesser than the likelihood of crimes in the Oval Office. But also, prosecutors don't have the power that presidents have. Prosecutors are bound by rules of evidence. They're bound by judges. They're bound by appeals. They're bound by their higher ups. They're bound by jury verdicts. I mean, they're bound by the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendment to the Constitution that gives criminal defendants certain rights under our system. So the idea that rogue prosecutors are just going to go crazy and start indicting presidents for, using military personnel in the theater to protect American citizens? No, I just don't. There's no evidence of that.
Yeah. And it's, once again, it's all crazy, but just literally the fact that they ruled that official acts cannot be used as evidence for unofficial acts is still the part to me that I think is wild. It's just
and also motive. Well, motive too. They also said you can't consider motive. Okay. So if a president
isn't that just like the basis of any criminal case?
Right. It's called mens rea. So, and that's the whole thing that we want to have pause. Okay. Do I tell SEAL Team 6 kill a political rival? Do I have SEAL Team 6 kill Osama bin Laden? I think most people applauded Barack Obama for pulling off the assassination of Osama bin Laden. But now, whether it's for the benefit of the American people or if it's for your own personal entrenchment of power and vindictiveness, that's now not a legitimate question for anyone to even ask. How can that be?
It's just like bad lawyering,
That's why it's cynical. It's cynical. Yeah. And, I've lost respect for the justices in the majority. Yeah. I really have.
Yeah, it's very upsetting to see. What would happen if Trump was found guilty within these state cases?
Well, in
regards to pardons?
Oh, sure. In New York, the governor pardons and the governor is a Democrat. So I think that's unlikely. In Georgia, it goes to a board and you're not even eligible until 5 years after you've completed your sentence. So a pardon is not in the works for Donald Trump in either of those states. And he doesn't have, unless, hey, I say this, Emily, you never know with this kooky-looky court and people make these most outrageous, maybe they'll concoct some sort of argument that he can pardon himself, twisting the words of the Constitution like Cirque du Soleil on his head. And maybe we'll get there. But as it stands right now, I would think that is an off the rails argument that should not see the light of day. And no, he cannot pardon state law crimes. That being said, I think under the immunity ruling, it could knock some of the evidence out of the hands of state law prosecutors. So it could lead to reversal of his New York conviction, and it could deactivate the ability to prosecute him in Georgia if they just don't have enough evidence to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt, because official acts are off the table and motive relating to official acts and evidence relating to official acts are all off the table.
Oh my God. I just want people to...
It's like if you're editing a movie and you just willy-nilly start snipping, a bunch of the film and the stuff on the floor is all the good stuff and you tape the rest of it together. Yeah. It's not worth showing.
Well, they're like, okay, you can have the beginning, you can have the end. You can't have any of the plot in the middle.
Right.
But figure it out. But then that's okay.
Or we'll tell you when we see you, when we decide in 3 years on the appeals of the 700 things we've now asked the lower courts to resolve with no guidance. We'll decide in a few years what we think is okay to go forward. That is not their job as judges. That's not their job to be making decisions on around prosecutorial discretion.
Yeah. And no matter what, whatever they decide will be appealed on one side or the next, right? Everything will go back up to the Supreme Court. I mean, this is...
because they didn't give any real guidelines.
Yeah.
The judges are going to have to make it up.
I have so much faith and trust in the legal system here. It's so good.
But you know what, Emily? I just want to just say it is working. I mean, I don't think people understand in other parts of the world, people don't respect the rule of law. Judges are, do stuff based on bribes and payments. I mean, in this moment, thank heaven. In this moment, our system of justice is working. There's buy-in in the American public in it as an institution. And once that goes, we lose everything. We as Americans still, for the most part, respect our government, respect the court system, respect each other as jurors. We accept the verdict. That is not the case in many parts of the world. Including in parts of Europe, right? Where we think they have it so great, frolicking around in Italy and everything looks so nice in France. But the fact that we we do believe in our institutions. That is so worth protecting. And that I'm surprised Chief Justice Roberts isn't doing more to shore that up on behalf of the Supreme Court, because once we are all eye rolling and we just don't pay any attention, then it really is chaos.
Yeah, no, you're right. When it comes to the Supreme Court, super hard.
No, I mean, I agree at the Supreme Court level. I agree with the Supreme Court, and that there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, the main thing is that Mitch McConnell, when he was Senate Majority Leader, senator from Kentucky, got rid of the filibuster. So the filibuster puts a supermajority requirement on decisions. Like, so instead of 50 votes in the Senate, you need 60. So he would have needed 10 Democrats to get Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Coney Barrett on the court. So they were all put on with bare majorities of Republicans and less than half of the buy-in of the country, because Senate Democrats represent more people than Senate Republicans, because there's more cities that are represented by the Democratic Party. So it's a greater part of the population. So the Supreme Court itself is completely anti-democratic. They're slashing and burning our rights, and they're not put on there by a majority of the people buying in through their elected representatives in the Senate, and they cannot be fired. So it's
not a fan.
The politicians, infected the process, unfortunately. Yeah. It's now become a political arm for sure. It's not the hallowed, neutral arbiters of justice that I agree that the framers expected to happen. That's why they gave them life tenure, because they did not want them answering to politicians. Yeah. And it's the money in the system has corrupted the process.
I was going to make a joke about how the framers would probably be like, to the SCOTUS now, like, I'm not mad, just disappointed, but I think they'd be mad. They would for sure be mad.
I think what they put, I mean, it's mind blowing when you think about it, what they sacrificed.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no government really in recent history that was not a hierarchy, where the king was the boss, and then there were serfs, and then people below and people below. And let them eat cake. You got the crumbs of the crumbs. Like, there was no way to, and then here they come, they have a revolution. They don't have an army, and they win over England, one of the biggest superpowers on the planet. And yeah, I think they'd say, wait a minute, didn't we get rid of the king? What are they doing making the president a king again? We worked really hard to get rid of King George III. Do you all understand what you're signing up for? You're not going to like it. And I think, Emily, I don't think people get it.
No, hopefully people listen to this podcast and realize, just how revolutionarily bad this decision is for democratic principles, and how this is just such off-the-cuff decision of anything of what the Constitution is supposed to be interpreted as. The gravity of the situation.
Very grave. And people say, what do you do about it? And, we probably don't have time to talk about it, but there's going to be more shenanigans between now and November. People need to vote, and they need to vote in massive numbers. I mean, the way to get through this is no questions about ballots. Even if people are going to say, oh, fraud, the numbers, the margins are so huge that the claims of fraud just become irrelevant. That's the way forward. That is the way. We normally vote like 60, 65%. We need to see 75, 80, 85, 90%. Friends, like, this is do or die moment. You need to grab everyone you know. And I know people have grievances. No politician's perfect. There are issues that we all have. But when you're in triage and you just got in a car accident, and it's, do they bandage your ankle? Do they fix your nose that got trashed, or do they make your heart start again? You get the heart going first.
Right.
And then you can fix the rest of it. Right. And that's really where we are.
Yeah. That's a fantastic metaphor. Kim, is there anything else you would like to say? And also, how can we find your book, and when does it come out?
So it comes out September 2nd, Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. And it's on my website, kimwehle.com. That's Wehle, or Amazon. You can pre-order it now. It's anywhere you buy books. And as you indicated, I have a Substack. You're welcome to sign up. I do a Q&A on legal issues twice a week. And that's also on my website. And I tweet and Instagram at Kim Wehle.
All great. All the best. All the ways to stay connected. And then people can become obsessed with the Supreme Court like I am, because of the way in which you help learn and teach us. And it's great.
Well, great to chat with you, Emily. I really appreciate the opportunity. And next time I'll crack open the beer.
I know. Next time we'll do it maybe post 5 p.m. All right.
Okay.
Kim, thank you so much. I'm your host, Emily Gross. We'll be back next week.